The man who wouldn't die. The dining room stank of cyanide. Sugar cakes, heavy wine, and poisoned pastries sat half-eaten, their sweetness masking death. The man at the head of the table chewed slowly, lips wet, beard matted, crumbs clinging to the wild black hair that hung over his chest. His blue eyes glowed with something unnatural, something feral. The conspirators watched in disbelief. Their trap was failing. The poison was not working. Rasputin, the mad monk of Russia, kept eating, kept smiling, his laughter echoing against the gilded walls of a palace that was about to become his battlefield. What happened that night in December 1916 has been whispered for over a century, distorted by propaganda, wrapped in myth, and softened by official history. But hidden diaries, medical reports suppressed by the Tsar's police, and testimonies smuggled out of Petrograd paint a darker picture. Rasputin's death was not quick, not dignified, not ordinary. It was a nightmare stretched over hours, a ritual of murder that defied reason. What you're about to hear is not the tale you learned in school. It is the horror of how Rasputin survived poison, bullets, and drowning until fate itself had to break him. Grigori Rasputin was both saint and devil in the eyes of Russia. To the Romanovs, he was a holy man, a healer who soothed the hemophilia of the young Tsarevich with whispered prayers. To the people, he was a charlatan, a drunkard, a lecher who crept through the corridors of power like a plague. The contradiction was terrifying. A peasant mystic, barefoot and unwashed, who held in his hands the fate of an empire. His rise from Siberian obscurity to the gilded halls of Saint Petersburg marked him as chosen by something, God or perhaps something darker. And so when his enemies plotted his death, they discovered a truth that would haunt them. Rasputin would not die like other men. The plan was simple. Felix Yusupov, one of Russia's richest princes, invited Rasputin to his palace. On the table, Madeira wine laced with cyanide, cakes stuffed with lethal powder. According to Yusupov's later confession, there was enough poison to kill 5 men instantly. Rasputin ate greedily, sipping wine, licking his fingers. At first, he complained of a bitter aftertaste, but then, nothing. His face flushed, his eyes shone brighter, and he demanded more. "Sing for me," he laughed, waving at his hosts. The conspirators glanced at each other in terror. The poison was failing. Their holy demon was immune, but that was just the beginning. Panic overtook Yusupov. He fetched a revolver. Rasputin, dazed but still alive, staggered toward him. A shot rang out, echoing through the marble halls. The bullet struck Rasputin in the chest. He fell backward, blood blooming across his tunic. Yusupov breathed in relief. At last, it was over. But when he leaned close to check the body, Rasputin's eyes snapped open. The monk growled, low and guttural, and with sudden strength, he clutched at Yusupov's collar. His breath stank of wine and iron. He rose to his feet, swaying, a corpse that refused to stay dead. Witness notes later described this moment as inhuman, more beast than man. Yusupov screamed. Rasputin lurched forward, staggering toward the stairs. Down the steps he crawled, trailing blood, each handprint smeared across the stone like a brand of defiance. Outside, the courtyard was filled with snow, the night silent except for his ragged breathing. Witnesses hiding in the shadows swore they saw him stumble into the yard, his beard frosted with blood and ice, his eyes glowing with furious light. He was trying to escape, to run into the city, to vanish into the maze of Petrograd's alleys. If he had reached the street, who knows what terror he might have unleashed. But fate, and his assassins, had other plans. 2 more men joined Yusupov. Vladimir Purishkevich, a right-wing politician, drew his weapon. He fired once. The bullet tore into Rasputin's back. Still, the monk crawled. Another shot, this time into his head. Rasputin collapsed face first into the snow, crimson spreading across the white like spilled paint. His fingers twitched, clawing at the ice, then finally lay still. The men stood over him, panting, their breath steaming in the cold. It had taken poison and 3 bullets to stop him. They thought it was finished. But when the body was later examined, the truth was even stranger. The final bullet may not have been the one that killed him. The conspirators wrapped the body in cloth, dragged it across the frozen ground, and hurled it into the Neva River through a hole in the ice. But the river refused its offering. When Rasputin's corpse was recovered days later, autopsy notes revealed water in his lungs. He had still been breathing when he hit the water. Even poisoned, shot, and beaten, he lived long enough to drown beneath the frozen surface of Saint Petersburg. Witnesses swore his eyes were open when they dragged him out, wide with the rage of a man who would not surrender to death. When Rasputin's corpse was finally pulled from the icy Neva, the horror was only beginning. His body, bloated from the freezing waters, was laid on a table in a makeshift morgue. Witnesses recoiled at the sight. His fingers were torn and ragged, nails broken, as though he had clawed desperately against the ice above him. His face was twisted, lips frozen in a silent scream, beard stiff with frost and blood. The autopsy notes, suppressed for decades, tell a disturbing tale. Cyanide crystals still clung to the lining of his stomach. 3 bullet wounds scarred his flesh, 1 to the chest, 1 to the back, and 1 through the forehead. But the lungs told the true story. They were filled with water. Rasputin, the mad monk, had not died from poison. He had not died from bullets. He had died thrashing, breathing, fighting beneath the frozen river. Death itself had to drown him. The news spread like wildfire through Petrograd. Some whispered he was a demon, others swore he was a saint. Soldiers muttered that if Rasputin could not be killed by poison or bullets, then Russia itself was doomed. Among the Romanovs, terror mingled with grief. The Tsarina wept for the man she believed was her family's protector, convinced that with his death, the dynasty's days were numbered. In hushed tones, courtiers admitted that Rasputin's endurance felt like prophecy, a final omen that the empire was collapsing. The assassins, meanwhile, could not silence their own nightmares. Felix Yusupov wrote years later that Rasputin's eyes haunted him in dreams, glowing even in death. Purishkevich confessed that killing Rasputin felt less like murder and more like an exorcism. But official records tried to soften the truth. Police reports reduced the story to simple gunshots. The autopsy was sealed. The drowning was denied. Only in secret diaries, smuggled letters, and whispers in taverns did the darker truth survive. Rasputin's end was not a clean assassination. It was a drawn-out ritual of horror, one that Russia itself would replay in blood within a year, when revolution consumed the empire. Rasputin's death remains one of the most grotesque and unforgettable nights in history. A man poisoned, shot, and beaten, who still breathed long enough to drown beneath ice. Whether saint, sinner, or sorcerer, his endurance defied reason and fed the myth that he was more than human. But this is only one chapter in the story of Russia's fall. If Rasputin's end shocked you, wait until you hear about the horrific execution of the Romanovs. A massacre so brutal, the world only learned the full details decades later. Subscribe now because the secrets of history are darker, stranger, and more haunting than you were ever told. History has struggled for more than a century to explain Rasputin's final night. Was he a mystic, touched by some dark power? A man with a body hardened by poverty, drink, and legend? Or did his survival simply become myth, whispered into eternity by those who feared him even after he was gone? What is certain is this: his death did not erase his presence. Rasputin became larger in death than he ever was in life, a symbol of everything mysterious, corrupt, and supernatural about the last days of Imperial Russia. Even now, his story lingers like a shadow across history, reminding us that some figures do not simply die, they haunt. If this tale unsettled you, remember, this is only one of the many secrets history tried to bury. For more stories the world was never meant to hear, subscribe to the hidden episode where the forbidden past refuses to stay silent.